Okay, the next topic we're going to consider in this lesson on the ideology of societies and civilizations is that of legitimation. So this refers to the way that the beliefs of a society, its ideology, provide a rhetorical justification for its social practices and social arrangements. So the thing is that humans seem to have an inherent sense of fairness. So, for example, the anthropologist Richard Lee worked with the Kalahari San, the Bushmen of the Kalahari Desert, in the 60s and 70s. And one Christmas, to show his thanks, he bought them an ox. So this is the story of Lee's ox. And instead of showing gratitude for this ox, the Bushmen kind of disparaged it. They said, "Oh, you call that an ox? You know, it's a bit measly, isn't it? Whoever sold that to you, saw you coming." And he realised that the point of this was to try and sort of cut him down to size. The Bushmen didn't like the idea that this Westerner could sort of come in and lord it over them by splashing the cash. They didn't want to sort of feel that to them an ox was something to be, grateful for, and it's a wonderful thing. Whereas for him it was just, oh, yes, I can, happily buy you an ox. It's nothing to me. They didn't want to feel inferior, that he could sort of show his greater economic power. So they wanted to reassert that sense of equality by, sending the message, well, we're not impressed by your ox. So it was trying to make things fair. And the trouble is that in complex societies, they are inherently unfair and unequal. Let's write that up. Complex societies inherently unfair and unequal. There are going to be rulers and ruled, and there are going to be people who use their intelligence and greater skills to make themselves rich through trade, for example, and other people who drift through life and end up relatively poor. So there is a need to justify or legitimate these this unfairness and inequality. And what rulers have tended to do is present their rule as righteous. So, for example, in ancient Egypt, there was the concept of Mart, who was also a goddess. So let's say Egypt, they had this concept of Mart. And Mart represented balance, harmony, fairness, justice, everything being right with the world. And the pharaohs presented themselves as kind of serving Mart, and they presented little statuettes of Mart at sacrifices. And so in this way, they were sort of sending the message that far from our rule being in itself unjust, we are the source of justice in Egyptian society. And similarly in China, they had for the emperors the concept of the mandate of heaven. So what heaven wants is obviously going to be fair and just and right. And if the emperors have the mandate of heaven to rule, then it means that their rule is fair and just and right. And then people who overthrew a dynasty could use the same concept to say, oh, well, they lost the mandate of heaven and we now have it. So, even something like overthrowing the existing ruler could be seen as a legitimate act by, the sleight of hand of this concept of the mandate of heaven. And the issue here is that rulers can't rule through pure coercion. You know, a ruler can't go round constantly with a sword in his hand or a submachine gun, forcing everyone into submission all the time. Certainly not with, you know, societies of hundreds of thousands or millions of people. It has to be legitimated by economic and cultural institutions. Legitimated by economic and cultural institutions. So, for example, rulers rake in taxes and they then use those taxes to provide benefits to the population. So that is kind of an economic justification. The subjects think, oh, you know, the ruler is rightful because we get things from them. They expend their generosity on us. Or cultural institutions. So the kind of thing we talk about here, the ideas of mart and the mandate of heaven, that the beliefs of the society are that this is the way things should be. And so it is acceptable, this arrangement where we have a ruler. And it's found that in the ancient Mediterranean, some of the large islands built very large monumental architecture, larger than on the mainland. And this monumental architecture was particularly built during times when trade and sailing in the Mediterranean had died away. So the ancient Mediterranean went through periods of recession that could last centuries, when there was very little sailing and interaction. And it's argued that the reason that the monumental architecture was built during this time was that when trade and sailing around the Mediterranean was vigorous, the rulers on these islands could legitimize themselves through economic means by their control of prestige goods, prestige art objects or precious metals, precious stones, that kind of thing. They controlled the trade, and so they had access to these things which they could then dispense to their population, and that legitimized their rule, their economic benefits to the population. But when trade declined, they didn't have access to that strategy of using prestige goods to legitimize themselves. And so this is why they built this monumental architecture. Particularly, you know, as we're saying, on these islands like Sardinia, Malta, the ones that were large but relatively isolated, so that when trade declined, they really were cut off, but perhaps not places like Sicily, which were close enough to the mainland that they wouldn't be cut off even during these times of recession. So the argument is that when they couldn't control prestige goods, they built these great statues or great temples to convey the message that they were powerful and special people, and so to legitimate their rule in that way. And now let's say a few words about the concept of royalty. So royalty is said to have something of a mystique. There's something special about the royals. In the Middle Ages, there was the concept of the royal touch. That by touching a king or a queen, it would cure disease. And royalty is something that is inherited. It's not something that is achieved. You know, just by becoming a successful person, you can't become a king. You are royal because you come from royal blood. So when new dynasties are founded, they tend to present themselves as in some way derived from the old dynasty. You know, they're a cousin or a minor branch of the old dynasty, but they're nevertheless themselves royal, part of the old dynasty. So let's put that up. New dynasties present themselves as being derived from older dynasties. And because royalty is inherited and not achieved, when countries or new countries want to give themselves a king, they don't elevate one of their own, prominent citizens, but they seek a royal from somewhere. It has to be somebody of royal blood. So, for example, Belgium and Greece in the 19th century, when they were looking for kings, they went out to the royal families of Europe and invited royals who didn't have a kingdom to come and be their king. So, for example, Belgium invited Leopold I, who was an uncle of Queen Victoria, to come and be their king. So a king, a royal, has to come from a royal family. It's something that is inherited. You either have it or you don't. You can't just by being successful make yourself royal. And so this is a form of legitimation, we might say, by descent. If you're royal, and it passes down through the line, and it makes it right and proper that you should be a ruler. And one sort of extreme implication of this, or conclusion from this, is that then throughout history and all around the world, there's only one royal family. Because royalty has always been passed down, there's never any new royals, then that implies that all royals are connected and all are ultimately derived from the first kings way back in the mists of time, maybe in ancient Egypt or before. And now let's say a few words about religion. So religion is something that legitimates not just the rulers, but the whole way of life of a society. Let's write that up. And Andrei Korotayev gives an illustration of this with respect to the adoption of Christianity and Islam by different societies. So he points out that they ostensibly worship the same God, but the religions have different characters, and they have been adopted in societies that have different cultures. So let's put that up. So Christianity versus Islam, using terminology that we saw in a paper mentioned in an earlier part of this lesson, regions based on social structure. Korotayev points out that Christianity has been adopted in societies that are matricentric with bilateral kinship, whereas Islam has been adopted by societies that are patricentric with unilineal kinship. So we can see from this that the religion is connected to the wider culture of a society. So the religion is not something that you can adopt arbitrarily or just sort of pick and choose. The religion of a society is fundamentally connected to its whole culture, its whole way of life. And insofar as the argument of the paper we just mentioned is that these cultural characteristics here are very persistent, then maybe the societies, it seems, have kind of adopted the religion, or at least shaped the religion that it fits their pre-existing culture. And this takes us into the realms of sort of Spengler and his idea of pseudomorphism. He says that when a civilization adopts cultural institutions such as religion from another civilization, it doesn't just adopt them as is, but it changes them and shapes them to suit its own existing worldview. So this is basically what Korotayev is saying here. They're the same basic ideas of the same God, takes on a very different form in different cultures, and that's because the religion is underpinning those cultural practices and legitimating things like gender relations, are different in these different societies, and that's why they're different in the different religions. And also political institutions, may differ culturally, and the religion reflects that difference. So we can say that religion is not an incidental part of a society or civilization. There's a tendency today to say, oh, religion, it's very old-fashioned, we should just get rid of it. But it's not something that you can just get rid of. It's something that's legitimizing your whole way of life, and therefore it performs a necessary function. It's actually fundamental to having a civilization and culture at all. So it's not incidental, but it's actually fundamental. And the universality of religion through history and around the world suggests that it performs some fundamental function in societies and civilizations. And we can quickly identify some of those. The ideological functions of religion. It justifies the social order. So, for example, the commandment, thou shalt not steal, justifies the institution of private property, for example. It provides an excuse for public rituals. That bring people together and create bonds between them. And it explains the purpose of life. What's it all about? So that everybody in the society is on the same hymn sheet and agrees that this is, what the purpose of things is, and therefore what we should be aiming for and how we should be moving towards it. And another one is, religion is often presented as kind of the opposite of science, but in some ways or sometimes religion has the same motivations as science to understand the cosmos, understand the universe, understand the secrets of nature. So we can put that up. And, some scientists today say that their work is about understanding the mind of God. They use that metaphor. So religion can have, as I say, the same basic purpose as science to explain the world. And that then alerts us to the idea that religion itself is not the important thing. It's fulfilling these functions that's the important thing. And if what we now call science comes along and starts explaining the secrets of nature, then that religion no longer needs to fulfill that ideological function in society. And so that kind of drops out of religion. So religion is not like a single thing. It's a complete package. It's more, it can mean different things in different contexts. And it's really just an umbrella word for a whole range of ideas and behaviors that fulfill ideological needs of society, the needs of legitimizing and justifying social structures and social practices. And so a religion is kind of the name we give to the things that fulfill those ideological needs. So the anthropologist C.R. Hall-Pike, who we've mentioned earlier, he identifies a set of functions that religion can perform. Doesn't necessarily perform all of them, but these are the kinds of things that are performed in society, the functions that institutions do exist for in societies, and that for want of a better word, we lump together under religion. So this is really just an expansion of what we've already put up here. So I'll just list what Hall-Pike gives as his functions of religion. So one is pattern and order. It creates an impression that there's pattern and order to the world. There is a deity. The deity is in control. The world is not just chaotic, but there is a reason for things. It's orderly. It brings nature into the social world, he says. So nature part of society. So, the idea that there are gods in the mountains, in the trees, or that we can pray to the gods to bring rain or to take it away. So it brings nature under social control, makes it part of our social world that we have some power over. The next one is that it provides outlets, he would say, for dreams and fantasies, to give them sort of social acceptability. So, in some religions, the shaman or the priest goes into trance states for dreams and fantasies. Or people can have dreams and see them as religious visions, for example. It gives an excuse for collective action. Like singing and dancing. And this is something that people enjoy. Singing together in a choir, for example, is said to be good for mental and even physical health. Another function is, we just discussed about explaining the world, explaining why things are the way they are in detail, the secrets of nature. Gives a basis for morality, rules of behaviour. People want to know what the boundaries are, what the rules of behaviour are. So they need some moral guidance. Religion can perform that function. And it also provides an outlet for charity, people's impulse to help the unfortunate. People do have this feeling, and religion provides a kind of conduit for that. So people can give alms to the church, and then the church can spend those on the poor, the sick, and the needy. So these are all things that society needs, and religion can be the kind of umbrella within which these things occur. But if some of them are performed by other functions in society, then that's fine, then they're not part of religion. But we can label religion these things when we see them. And what we also notice about this is that belief in a supernatural being is not a necessary part of any of this. So that the belief in supernatural being is not a necessary part of a religion. And the theoretical historian Geoffrey Blainey says that if we take away the supernatural aspect of religion, we just replace it with more materialist religions. But ultimately, they're performing the same purpose. They're pseudo-religions that are still legitimating the way of life of a society and fulfilling some of these functions. So let's write up here Blainey, just making a bit more space. Geoffrey Blainey. So he says that in Western society, as it has moved away from traditional religion, it has replaced it with a series of materialist religions. over the last 2 or 3 centuries. So, he says it in Western society, it started off with Christianity as the religion that performed a lot of these functions. But then he said that was replaced with the doctrine of what he calls capitalist individualism. And liberalism. So this was an idea of, the survival of the fittest. Society is a struggle for survival. People should be free to compete within that struggle, and the best will win. And then so this legitimizes social inequality, because the capitalists, the people who come out on top, we could just say, well, they were just successful in the struggle for survival. Then he says that what came along next was the idea of science and technology. So in the late 19th, early 20th century, the time of sort of Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, the idea was that science and technology would solve all the problems of the world. And so and what science and technology dictated and necessitated seemed to be the source of legitimacy of how things should be and how things should happen. But then he says after that, as people became disillusioned with that, in came the ideas of democratic socialism. So in the early to mid 20th century, the idea that new political movements would solve all the problems of society, and the socialist doctrines then justified the political arrangements that were the right and fair and equal ones. And then as those proved to be disappointments and didn't deliver the fairness and equality that they were supposed to, he says that the next thing that came along was environmentalism. And he was writing in the late 80s, but I think we can say today this is an important source of social legitimation. So it is, in Blaney's terms, a new pseudo-religion, because we know that protecting the environment, protecting the planet is a powerful source of legitimation of many measures that governments want to introduce, taxes and so on. So yes, we have religion, but it's a complex concept. But what it is those sets of ideas and behaviours that legitimize a way of life, and that has this, many different aspects to it, and that if we get rid of belief in a supernatural being as the ultimate source of legitimation, we have to find other more materialist sources of legitimation. And now, while we're on religion, let's have a look at a couple of typologies of religion. So the first one is due to Northcote Parkinson, and he distinguishes two types, what he calls theistic religions that believe in a god, so things like Christianity and Islam, versus what he calls philosophic religions that don't believe in a god but are about a deep understanding of the cosmos. So we're thinking about things like Buddhism and Confucianism. So he says that with theistic religions, their emphasis is on the teachings of the religion, the teachings of the founder of the religion, and those teachings are ultimately supposed to derive from the deity. Whereas in philosophic religions, the emphasis is more on a personal quest towards enlightenment. And then another typology is from Freke and Gandy, Tim Freke and Peter Gandy. They say that when a new religion comes into a society or civilization, it starts off as a gnostic religion based on gnosis, which means knowing. So this emphasizes personal inquiry, and it's about religious enthusiasm, personal spirituality, and it encourages speculation. And so they say that when a religion like this comes into a society, it's not a form of legitimation, it's often subversive of the existing social order. So when a social order is under threat, when a social order is no longer fit for purpose, what can start to happen is that a new religion comes in, taking shape to justify a new social order. So at the moment, the society's religion justifies the old social order, but that old social order is creaking under the stress of various changes that might be going on in the outside world, and it needs to transform something else, but it can't because it's justified by the old religion. But then a new religion coming in potentially will provide the legitimation of the new order, but it's when it's first coming in, it's subversive then of the old religion and the old order. That's in the Gnostic phase, and then that evolves into what they call a literalist form. So at this point, the religion starts to be taken over by priests and has a hierarchy, and it becomes dogmatic. It has certain teachings. You're no longer encouraged to speculate and develop your own ideas about this new religion. There is a dogma that you have to believe, and if you're not, you're a heretic and you're burned at the stake. So the Gnostic evolves into the literalist form. And at this point, it then becomes, the religion that underpins the new social order, and it becomes static because it is justifying this new social order, which it's trying to stabilise, not to question. And this brings us on to the concept of the Axial Age, which we encountered in a previous module as the time when many of today's religions first came into existence, around 600 to 400 BC. And this was a time when there were major structural changes going on in societies, and the response was the emergence of new religions to legitimate the new social structures that were emerging. So some of the issues that were affecting societies at that time were new technologies. So particularly the introduction of ironworking. One of the features of iron was that it was rather democratizing, in the sense that the previous technology of bronze was based on copper and tin, which are quite rare. And so bronze was rare, and only the elites had bronze and bronze weapons. And so this gave them a lot of power over the rest of the society. But the thing about iron is that the raw material is abundant, and the problem is not the iron ore, but the processing of it. But once that technology had been cracked, basically high temperature furnaces, then iron could become much more ubiquitous, and metal weapons could become much more ubiquitous in many more people's hands. So this undermined the existing power structures. So that was one issue affecting society, this technological revolution of iron. Another feature was high population density, massive increases in population and population density, which are partly, at least in part, related to the technological innovation. So, for example, with iron, it wasn't just about weapons, but also metal tools that made farming more efficient, and so could feed more people and support higher populations and higher population density. And another thing was better communications. Again, technological innovations in transport, wider literacy, the invention of postal systems, allowing people to keep in touch over longer distances and move around further and interact more easily. So all these things were affecting societies, and the sort of effects they were producing: firstly, urbanization, packing more people into cities that were bigger than before, and also the emergence of metal coinage to help manage the much more complex economic interactions that people were involved in. And also there was a greater degree of political and social instability, because for example, with urbanization, many more people packed together, there's much more opportunity for riots and revolutions. And similarly with the greater abundance of iron weaponry. So all these things led people, on the one hand, to feel that there were new freedoms and opportunities that they didn't have in the past, but there were also new fears and anxieties. So insofar as society seemed to be changing rapidly, there was social instability. You were having to live next door to, large numbers of people crammed into cities. More violence because of the greater availability of weaponry and so on. So the people's social challenges were different and more intense, new freedoms but new fears, and this is what required a legitimation of these new issues in society through a suitable religious outlook, a suitable worldview. And this is what brought in to existence, the argument would be new religions, and those religions emphasized firstly sort of personal morality. So there was a personal relationship with the deity. So with these very large populations, to keep a social order, people individually had to regulate their own behavior. It wasn't enough to have just the priests communicating with the gods through sacrifices on behalf of the general public. And now the people themselves had to internalize these religious values. And another aspect with these religions was that they provided a kind of solace, comfort, in a world that was changing, that was full of fears and anxieties. It talked about an afterlife, so it could legitimize all these stresses of society by saying, well, everything will be all right in the end. We'll all end up in paradise and everything will be wonderful then. So this is then what drove the Axial Age from a previous religious ideas that legitimized a previous social order to their new religious ideas that legitimized the new social order that was created through these interlocking processes. And this Axial Age was a worldwide phenomenon. It affected the Middle East, China, India, so the whole of the old world. And that's because these processes were worldwide, population growth was worldwide, technology was diffusing worldwide. So we can say that these had shared issues. And also just because they were connected anyway through trade routes, you know, the Silk Road, for example, connecting the Middle East and China. So the Axial Age is a worldwide phenomenon, with Buddhism emerging in India at the same time as Socrates is developing his ideas in Greece. And so this meant that the religions coming out of this Axial Age were now world religions, not, you know, the local gods of the city that the priests sacrificed to, but these were world religions based, as I say, on personal morality and the solace of a personal relationship with the divinity. And well, we could say also that they were world or mass religions for the masses. And this also served the purposes of elites, the rulers, because with these larger societies, the rulers found themselves presiding over multiple ethnicities, multiple people from multiple cultures. In empires, they were ruling over disparate peoples. Well, with world religions, mass religions that appealed to, very broadly, it supported elites that were having to rule over these multi-ethnic societies. So let's just write that. With world religions, world or mass religions, it made it possible to rule over disparate peoples. And so we see from this very much a kind of structure emphasizing perspective. That is, it wasn't about the agency of the individual prophets who came along at that time and gave their messages to humanity. It was about the receptiveness of the world to those messages that is characterizes this argument about the Axial Age and the logic behind it. So it was all about the receptiveness of the world, of the societies of the world, of the peoples of the world. So, in other words, not the individual prophets. That's not what drove it. It was driven by this process. And two theoretical historians, Ken Baskin and Dmitri Bondarenko, who've written on a book on the Axial Age, identify 6 stages in the evolution of the Axial Age, or the progress of the actual Axial Age. So having studied it in detail, they find that there are these 6 stages to it, which I'll write. So the first stage is political fragmentation. So there were these stresses in the states and societies of that period, and that led to societies breaking up, political fragmentation. And this led to social experiments. So out of the fragments of the previous states, people developed new states, but that were arranged along different lines. And some of those were short-lived and failures, and others were more successful and became templates for further experiments and future generations of societies. Then in the third stage, they suggest there was an intensification of war. War intensification. So, with greater availability of weaponry, stresses, resource competition, all this led to intensification of war. And this created a very competitive environment for these social experiments. So it produced a selection pressure that helped select those new forms of society that were best adapted to the emerging new conditions of the world. Then the fourth stage was the emergence of these new world views. So this is when we get to here, these new philosophical and religious ideas. People starting to say, hey, this is how the world should be run, starting to rethink the people's religious and philosophical ideas. Then the fifth stage was, they suggest, critical examination by people of these new worldviews. So there were many of them. There was another natural selection process as people evaluated these new ideas, and ones that seemed to be most satisfactory began to spread. And then lastly, they suggest that led to empire. So now the societies that took on these new religions that were now well adapted for the new conditions of the world, such as the availability of iron, those ones that had adopted those successful new world views were well suited to conquer their neighbours who had yet to catch up with the new way of thinking. So you established empires, and those helped to spread these new religions. So here we're in the realms of Toynbee, and his ideas of the universal state, i.e. the empire that spreads, is a conduit for the universal church. So, as I say, Baskin and Bondarenko identify those as the 6 stages of this axial age process. The development of new religions to legitimize new social practices and arrangements. So now let's say a few words about the future of religion. So we've been arguing that religion is plays a fundamental role in society as a source of legitimation of the social order, and yet we see in Western societies today that they seem to be moving away from religion, or at least from explicit forms of religion, traditional religions. So what is going to fulfill that function in future? What is going to be the future type of religion? Well, one argument is from Theodore Modis, a theoretical historian, who has plotted the number of saints recognised by the Catholic Church over time. So starting, at the beginning of the church around the year 0 up to today, 2000, he finds that it's gone in 2 logistic pulses. And logistics are really Theodore Modis's, weapon of choice. Yes, so there was a logistic pulse, then a lull for a few centuries in the number of saints being recognised by the church, and then it took off again and is now plateauing again. Well, the obvious inference is that it might eventually in future start to take off again on a new logistic wave. And so this would mean that the church is sort of in the doldrums at the moment, but there will come a time in the future when new Christian visionaries come along and reinvigorate the church and to provide new spiritual leadership to make it flourish again. But on the other hand, Baskin and Bondarenko, who we were just mentioning with their 6 stages of the Axial Age, have suggested that we're in a new Axial Age. So let's write their names up this time. Their work on the Axial Age is, geared towards arguing that we are in a new Axial Age. So they see those same processes that occurred in the original Axial Age happening in the world again today. So particularly there's a great increase in connectedness, which is fairly obvious through the internet and world travel. You can get to anywhere on the planet in 24 hours. And also great increase in population and population density. Although it's massively slowing down now, in the second half of the 20th century, or perhaps I should say the middle half of the 20th century, there was a massive population explosion that worried some people at the time. So that has led not just to higher population, but higher population densities. So there's the emergence of megacities, which are defined as cities with more than 100 million populations. So, for example, parts of China, many cities connected together, forming megacities, or also the east coast of America. There's sort of almost continuous strip of urbanization, forming connected cities reaching 100 million people. And with so many people packed together, it's cities have been described as social reactors. They're places for the generation of new ideas. Well, with these megacities, we can expect massive generation of new ideas for new religious and spiritual and philosophic ideas, among other things. So the conditions are emerging of an axial age, they suggest, and we can certainly see that old religions are failing. They increasingly seem to people irrelevant to the concerns of today. So we would expect then, they expect new religions, new prophets to be emerging round about now. And as for the character of those new religions, well, they won't necessarily be any more rational than the religions of the past. They could be cult-like. They're not necessarily rational, though we might like to believe that they are, but then they are not necessarily going to be. They could originate in cults that then become institutionalized and move into that literalist phase. So but we don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But you may believe that some of these things are happening already. You can see these trends in the world around us, or you may see them coming in future. But this is what we should expect is emerging now and over the next few centuries as we go through our new axial age, new ideas to deal with the new conditions of society. And lastly, while we're on the subject of social change and the emergence of new ideas, new philosophies to legitimize the changed social order, we'll briefly consider the idea of generation gaps. So generation gaps occur because the senior generation grew up in conditions that are very different from the junior generation. So they grew up with ideas, values, beliefs that legitimize the world order when they were young, and they're retaining those, but the new generation is growing up with new values, new beliefs that legitimize a changed society. So there is a gap in the ideologies of the generations. And the social anthropologist Margaret Mead suggested that we can characterize societies in terms of how fast their cultures or their social conditions are changing, and then that affects attitudes within the society relative to the generations. So she defined what she called post-figurative, co-figurative, and prefigurative societies. And what distinguishes these is the pace of change. So in post-figurative societies, it is slow. In co-figurative societies, it is fast. And in prefigurative societies, it is very fast. And in the post-figurative societies, where change is slow, it means that children learn from adults, because the world doesn't change very much. So adult knowledge is very useful to the present condition of the world, and their experience is very relevant to the present condition of the world, because that experience is based upon the way the world currently is. So it's very much worth listening to adults, because they've seen it all, and what they know is relevant to today. So in this case, children learn from adults. In the, well, let's go to the prefigurative type, where change is happening very, very fast. In this case, what adults know is no longer relevant, because society has already changed. So all their experience is based upon the way things were in the past. So an adult today may have 40 years of experience of life, but that was 40 years of experience before the emergence of AI, and a lot of it before the emergence of the internet. So their experience is irrelevant to the conditions of the present world. And so in this case, it's often children who are better suited to the way the world is, because they're still actively learning, and they're not stuck in their old ways. So everything they know is relevant to the immediate present conditions of the world. And so we get the familiar situation where the grandma is learning how to operate her phone from the toddler. So the prefigurative society, the adults learn from the children. And in the co-figurative society, it's somewhere between. It's changing, reasonably fast, and people are therefore having to adapt and change and keep up. People, children and adults, learn from their peers. So they see what other people are doing. It's not fast enough that the children are so much better, and it's not slow enough that the adult experience is still relevant. It's somewhere in between. And so she suggests this is going to affect the relations between the generations. So here, where children learn from adults and adult experience is still relevant, people will respect their elders. Grandpa's knowledge is very useful to know, so you respect your elders. But when adults learn from children, you'd expect little respect for elders. They're past it. They don't know what's going on anymore. So, there's no reason to respect them. And she says this condition occurs in traditional societies encountering advanced technological societies, or encountering Western societies that are meeting them. I mean, she was writing in the early to middle 20th century, so that was still a time when colonialism was still being practiced, and so traditional societies in the Pacific or Africa or South America were coming into contact with Western societies, Western technologies, from radios to Coca-Cola. So in such societies, change was happening very fast through this contact. And so adults were learning from children, and so the traditional respect that children had for adults in those societies was disappearing. And this was causing a lot of social stress in those societies. And it's also true, of course, of the West itself today, due to the technological growth, the rapid technological growth that's now occurring. So again, don't expect any respect from the younger generation if you live in a Western society that is rapidly changing due to technology growth. You are a dinosaur and will be treated as such.